Hello, I'm Sukhnidh. Today I will be sharing with you the findings of a study conducted at Microsoft Research India on the challenges faced by online disability rights advocates in India. I would like to take a moment to share a trigger warning before we begin, because we explore many forms of online ableism, harassment, and discrimination in the next 10 minutes with real life examples. So, we know from the lived experiences of disabled people and the research that centers them that to be disabled in this world is to constantly face discrimination. This reality is intensified manyfold in India, which is home to over 60 million disabled people. The subcontinent contends with a very deep historical stigma around disability, which becomes even deeper at the intersection of gender. This is a problem deeply tied to technology in contemporary times, and this presentation will hopefully shed some light on why. India is witnessing a kind of revolution in terms of social media adoption. A lot of people are coming online. This means more disabled users, it means more platforms for advocacy, but it also means more abled expressions of ignorance and stigma, which show up in reactive and often hurtful ways. Now, emergent scholarship from the West has highlighted how online ableism happens up north. But in the global south, there is a serious dearth of scholarly interrogation. The way we perceive disability in India is different. It is driven by religious constructions like karmic divine retribution, which faults people for their conditions, a deluge of mainstream media portrayals of social maladjustment, the government's insistence to call disabled Indians divyang or divine or extraordinary in a way that centers the abled gaze, long-standing beliefs in homegrown medicine and mystical healing, and more. The idea we had as a research group was that since ableism shows up so intensely in India, and India is increasingly tuning in on social media, disabled online advocates are likely to contend with this ableism in a big, meaningful way. But there is no in-depth qualitative HCI research study from India that illuminates this reality as a first step towards changing it. So that's the work that we wanted to do. Now, to do this study, we recruited participants on social media who had publicly disclosed their disability. So we looked at hashtags and following lists and online listicles and went in with no real presumptions about what disability looks like, what it is, or what constitutes advocacy. This resulted in a pool of participants across a wide spectrum of disabilities such as thalassemia, muscular dystrophy, spina bifida, vision impairment, cerebral palsy, autism across the age groups of 18 to 44. Most had undergraduate or master's degrees and were employed in a variety of professions from comedy to sports to law. We conducted semi-structured interviews online in whatever language the participants preferred, which we could also speak, and asked them to fill out a demographic survey. We asked questions about how and why they engage in online advocacy, challenges they face in the process, and the contours of their negotiations with online visibility. Once we concluded the interviews, we performed a thematic analysis, open-coded the data, and took multiple passes over time to establish credibility. We found 5 key challenges, which you see on the screen here, and they have much to do with power, dismissal, sex, and invisibility, always painting the disabled advocate as the other. And also 2 key coping mechanisms, namely self-censorship when facing both allies as well as the disabled community members, and fragmenting one's identity to be more palatable. So let's do a deep dive into these findings. First, we found that participants are patronized in response to advocacy work. If they talk about love, they hear, "Oh, your partner must be so kind." If they show up online just as themselves, they are directed towards babas and doctors and yoga clinics as if they're not experts on their own conditions. Or they are told, "We are so proud of you." These infantilizing comments construct them as lacking agency and needing guidance and validation from abled onlookers, which they don't want. But then they are also portrayed as inspirational, hearing comments such as, "You are so brave," which place undue emphasis on ideas of conquering disability or thriving despite it. This portrays disability negatively as something to be overcome and once again deepens stigma. Now, inspirational stories tend to receive lots of online engagement in India because that feel-good content is what abled users want to consume. Some advocates feel forced to cater to this abled case because the way social media algorithms are structured, it is this abled user base that has the numbers to make content like advocacy or content around disability go viral. And the weird thing is that despite onlookers' fixation with these disabilities, they also seek to invalidate them and minimize the suffering that they cause, implying things like, "Oh, your disability isn't serious enough," or, "At least you can walk and talk," or "You have a job, you're so privileged anyway." These accusatory comments particularly make participants with invisible disabilities feel like they're just not disabled enough. One participant, a Paralympian that we spoke to, even contended with comments like, "Oh, what have you done to be verified on Instagram?" implying that their success is not wholly deserved or is a handout just because they're disabled. In general, we found a trend that able users struggle to see disabled advocates as whole human beings with personalities and hobbies across fashion and beauty and comedy, which our participants had. And if participants don't fit into this agenda, it seemingly leaves abled users confused and angry. Now, you'll notice a lot of conundrums in our findings because there's also a dichotomy around sex. Some participants were desexualized, hearing comments such as, "How can she wear a low neck dress? She's in a wheelchair." Or, "Your legs are showing, we are not interested." Or, "You should be grateful for our attention." One participant even said that no one even calls her a slut online and never has because they just can't see her as a sexual being. But other participants were over-sexualized, being told that they are somebody's fetish, that their followers are writing erotic stories about them, that they would like to sexually assault them because they cannot run anywhere. Either way, whether it's desexualization or over-sexualization, sex becomes a manifestation of power, and stripping it away from somebody or using it as a means of domination are both forms of ableist discrimination. Now, research also tells us that, it already tells us that disabled people are more likely to be trolled and harassed than able people. Our participants illuminated the extent of this in India. We found several instances in which they engaged in advocacy, such as writing articles about sexual experiences, conducting blood donation drives during COVID-19, calling out ableist institutions on Twitter, or even just posting selfies, and experiencing intense retaliation for this in the form of doxing, group harassment in comment sections and direct messages by literal hundreds of people, accusations of being fraudsters and scamsters, and very, very intrusive and demeaning comments such as, "Oh, you have very weird eyes," or "Can you even get an erection?" The problem is that for online advocacy to be successful, it has to gain visibility and virality, and this visibility and virality is what invites more and more harassment. Lastly, an important and often overlooked challenge is the simple fact of being ignored, where posts do not receive visibility and virality because abled users refuse to engage with them. And when they do, it's still not really powerful enough engagement to drive actual institutional change in meaningful ways, for example, at the level of the government. We noted experiences of users posting about incredibly ableist experiences, such as being denied public transportation and being called an animal, and still not being able to gather any public support on the posts that they put on their Instagram talking about these experiences. And also, very importantly, the process of constantly keeping up with online trends, trending audios, flashy edits, entertaining visuals, ways to go viral in the attention economy just to be seen online are exhausting and physically draining and sometimes physically impossible for many. But there is no other choice. One of the main ways in which disabled advocates cope with these challenges is by self-censorship, which comes in many ways. It could include toning down, not permitting themselves to show anger, attempting to be as uncontroversial as possible, backing their facts up with as much data as possible, and constantly negotiating the what-ifs of open expression about their lived experiences. Now, on one hand, they feel that they cannot afford to alienate the allies that they do have. And they're in a constant battle to not offend them because power is still in the hands of a large volume of abled users, and they are the ones who can take away this power of visibility from disabled advocates at any time because of the way social media is structured. On the other hand, our participants also found that they couldn't afford to offend members from their very own disabled communities. For example, those with different or more or less profound disabilities than them. There was a fear of being cancelled, of not having a perfect politics, of being seen as relatively privileged compared to, other disabled people, or of misrepresenting a disabled community or a larger advocacy organization. And these fears ran very, very deep. And both of these realities come together and enforce significant silence and self-restriction on disabled advocates in online spaces in India. A second way of coping was to break apart one's identity. For example, having one quiet submissive part of themselves on one platform or account, followed by their parents or friends, and then one loud activist part of themselves on another platform or account, followed by perfect strangers. And these identities and accounts are split into public and private, socially acceptable and unacceptable, docile and powerful. They may even choose to post more controversial opinions on their Instagram stories, which promise to disappear in 24 hours, rather than on a permanent grid. Much of this fragmentation is due to the continued domination of the abled gaze and abled users in the online sphere and a need to escape it. Which again brings us to a major problem. These abled users are the key targets of most of our participants' work, who are trying to convert them into allies and educate them on disability in India. Now, our participants' willingness to lend their voices to us has extended the current scholarship on disability advocacy in three very meaningful ways. It shows the role of multiple marginalization along lines of disability and gender in India, which is a very, very patriarchal country. It shows that, the challenges regarding, surrounding online disability advocacy are not just by abled followers and abled users, but also by one's own community, one's own family. And it also shows that socio-technical architectures of social media platforms shape the engagement of disability advocates in a very, very big and meaningful way. And, in this process, techno-ableism appears across interpersonal relationships and online cultures and platforms themselves. So, given these findings, we present three arguments. First, due to the way social media platforms are socio-technically structured to center and elevate the perspectives of masses, and masses are abled and often ableist users, disabled advocates have to choose. They constantly have to make a choice between either receiving visibility and positive outcomes or their own dignity and safety. Social media also rewards normativity, competition, and desirability. And this is a problem because disability is often a deviance from all of these things, and hence it goes unrewarded and invisibilized, which means that advocacy becomes invisibilized. And these are the algorithmic cultures that we live in, and modifying them and divesting power may stop the engagement-oriented architectures of social media platforms from invisibilizing these disabled voices. Second, online narratives of disability, what it is, how it manifests, are determined not by disabled users, but by ableist reactions to disabled users and their advocacy, such as microaggressions, trolling, and ableist misogyny, because the things that abled users post receive so much more visibility. This leads to a public collective failure of acknowledging disabled users as the actual authorities and experts on their own lives and on disability. And it can be combated by reformative and educational approaches that must take place by the platforms and must be pushed and encouraged by platforms on the platforms themselves. Lastly, there is little redressal for gendered ableism. A lot of scholarship has explored the inability of social media platforms to tackle sexual violence in the global south. And our findings suggest that this is an urgent problem for disability advocacy in India as well. Those were our findings, and we just wanted to say thank you very much for the participants who so willingly agreed to lend their voices to us, to trust us with these voices, and to put a lens of human-computer interaction on them, and share their experiences with the world in a country where there is, as mentioned right in the beginning of this presentation, a serious dearth of scholarly interrogation in this area and of platform accountability as well. Thank you.